In this section, we'll look at Roosevelt's second term, from 1904 to 1908. And having won his election in 1904, Roosevelt really felt empowered to pursue a more aggressive reform agenda. He forced the old guard conservative Mark Hanna to retire and appointed more progressive-minded subordinates. Early in 1905, Roosevelt began to push a significant federal regulation, the Hepburn Act of 1906. And the Hepburn Act empowered the Interstate Commerce Commission to set maximum rates for the railroads and to examine the railroads' financial records. Before, without such powers, the Interstate Commerce Commission couldn't disprove the railroad companies' arguments that their higher rates were necessary to incur the cost of extending the railroad lines across the vast West. Now the ICC could say, no, that's not true, I've seen your books. The Hepburn Act also curtailed the railroad's practice of distributing free passes to powerful friends. Simply put, the Interstate Commerce Commission now had true regulatory teeth. Roosevelt then worked to pass some consumer protections that the middle class demanded. With the Industrial Revolution, canned goods were becoming more common, canned foods, and many of them were mislabeled. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was intended to ban the interstate and international traffic of adulterated or mislabeled food or drug products. It assigned regulation of the law to the Bureau of Chemistry in the Department of Agriculture, which was expanded and renamed the Food and Drug Administration in 1930. The FDA, of course, is what regulates food and drugs today. Anyway, for the first time in 1906, food products had to be honest in their labeling. Before the Food and Drug Act of 1906, fraud was common and you could really take a risk with eating some certain foods or drugs. Drugs were particularly dangerous, as so-called snake oil salesmen often proliferated. People would say that their cures could cure anything, and you didn't really know what the heck was in the drug. For example, the use of stimulants such as cocaine were widespread as painkillers. A company termed Coca-Cola was incorporated in 1892 using carbonated water and sugar, but also cocaine. Heroin was widely used as well as a cough suppressant. For the first time with the Pure Food and Drug Act, the government listed 10 ingredients that were deemed addictive or dangerous, included cocaine and heroin. A decade later, in the Narcotics Act of 1914, also known as the Harrison Act, the government finally restricted their use and taxed it, which was the first effective attempt to regulate their use. It could be also added that marijuana, by the way, was first regulated in the 1930s. On the same day Roosevelt signed the Pure Food and Drug Act, he also signed the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906. Many meat products were contaminated by an unsanitary process of slaughtering and processing. The abuses had been depicted in Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, and really got everybody all worked up about it. So what this Meat Inspection Act did was it authorized the Department of Agriculture to inspect and condemn any meat product found unsafe for human consumption. Once again, all labels had to be accurate. Today, of course, the meat has a USDA inspection sticker and a mandated expiration date. After the election, Roosevelt moved forcibly as far as conservation agenda. In 1905, he appointed Gifford Pinchot to lead a new United States Forest Service located in the Department of Agriculture. The Forest Service would acquire and scientifically manage the federal timber reserves. The new expert foresters would ensure sufficient planting and cultivation to match the harvesting. In this way, of course, the United States Forest Service would ensure a continuous supply of timber, classic wise use conservation. A lot of private interests resisted the setting aside of hundreds of millions of acres from development, but the Forest Service did not completely please the preservationists either. Pinchot was an outspoken advocate of using nature wisely, wise use conservation, and didn't really stress protecting the land from development, for its scenic beauty. When Pinchot organized a White House conference on conservation for the nation's governors in 1908, He didn't even invite the Sierra Club's founder, John Muir, or other preservationists. While Roosevelt clearly favored Pinchot and Wajau's conservation, he still understood the need for some preservation as well. In fact, Roosevelt had even gone camping with John Muir of the Sierra Club. Even as Roosevelt supported Pinchot's multiple-use management program, he found a way to preserve areas of natural beauty, and he did this by using the Antiquities Act of 1906, which actually was intended to protect archaeological sites, especially in the Southwest. Roosevelt, anyway, used the law expansively, protecting thousands of acres with no archaeological value, only natural beauty. Many of these later became national parks. Roosevelt also identified 51 wildlife reserves and 18 national monuments. Together, with the acreage removed for the Forest Service, Roosevelt set aside over 200 million acres of land from private development. In this way, he was a friend to preservationists as well as obviously to the numerous conservationists. It should be noted that during this time there was a big struggle between Wajau's conservation and preservationists over the Hetch Hetchy Valley in California. It was a beautiful valley that the preservationists valued, but was under study for a dam that would supply water to the growing city of San Francisco. And it came to Congress, and Congress eventually approved the dam, and the valley was became a reservoir. As his second term wound down in 1908, Roosevelt still had an ambitious reform agenda. The Supreme Court had just struck down the Employers' Liability Act of 1906, which had provided an early form of workmen's compensation for railroad workers, and Roosevelt was pretty ticked off and was demanding new legislation. He also wanted to make the Interstate Commerce Commission even stronger. Nevertheless, Roosevelt faced problems. There was a panic for a run on the banks in 1907, which caused a recession that lingered into 1908, and he had to think about continuing to grow the economy out of that recession. But the thing was, Roosevelt had promised soon after the 1904 victory that he would not seek re-election in 1908, and he didn't want to look like a hypocrite, and so he decided and announced that he again would not seek re-election in 1908. This brings the section on Roosevelt's second term to a conclusion.